Break, Casey Gerald and I discussed the arc his life had taken and how he went from rags to riches. In this portion of the interview, we discuss some contemporary politics and changes he would like to see happen in our country. Any parent would say, my God, I raised a kid who goes to Ivy League school, phenomenal student, athlete. He takes that, he finds opportunities and excels, whether it be in the private industry, whether it be going to then get his MBA at Harvard. It checks off every single box that you can possibly do. And they try and say, you are the pull yourself up from the bootstraps guy. And I know when you hear that, you want to strangle him because, as I read there, a lot of kids don't have boots. That would be Vance's position, right? That those, if there's a will, they'll find a way. You take a different vantage point. What have you found when you went around the country, right? MBAs across America. What did you find that you can't put it into the box that I think many of us want to find neat boxes to put things into?
Well, it's two things, two very important things, and it's less about what I found and more about what found me. You know, I achieved everything a kid's supposed to achieve in this country by my late 20s, but I was very cracked up. I wouldn't necessarily say I was having a nervous breakdown, but I wasn't too far off. And I was awful sad either way. So I started this thing initially just to trace those cracks with words. And before I finished, one of my closest friends from Yale, another kid who had also gone on this Horatio Alger journey, he committed suicide. And he came to me in a dream shortly after that. And he was sitting in a booth in a diner, and he leaned back and he said, you know, Casey, we did a lot of things that we would not advise anybody we loved to do. And I knew what he meant. I knew that if you catch it from the right angle, a kid picking themselves up by their bootstraps looks just like a suicide. Yeah, you check every material box there is, but, you know, as Paul said 2,000 years ago, what would it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? There's a reason that suicide is the second leading cause of death in kids 18 to 24. There's a reason that a course on happiness was the most popular course at Yale in the history of the college. It is very alarming that the standards of our society as it pertains to achievement are deeply miserable. And I think every parent in America ought to be very worried about putting their kids on these treadmills of success that have been laid out, that also happen to be treadmills of trauma. You see what I'm saying? That's the first thing. But there's another thing. And this, again, is why the deep, is this beautiful story in JD's work, but there are policy implications that are dangerous because the American dream distracts us from the American machine. The American machine and the American reality is that there's a conveyor belt that leads most young people in this country in neighborhoods like mine in Breaux Bridge, Louisiana, and Appalachia from nothing to nowhere. And they pick off a chosen few like me or like JD. But one JD Vance or one Casey Gerald is not enough to substantiate the suffering of millions of children in this country. So if I had my druthers, I would have policies that perhaps have fewer kids going off and being those superstar Casey Geralds. If we could have more broad-based opportunity for young people in every community, regardless of the neighborhood they are raised in, regardless of the family they're born into. That's the kind of country that I think we can build, and we're at, I think, a very pivotal, very, very pivotal decision point, Richard, in this country. And I think the recent midterm elections really showed us, I think the future of the country has to be much more of a sort of democratic socialist, not to use Bernie Sanders language. But we've got to end this idea that it's every man, woman, child for themselves. And that's been the standard for the Democrats and the Republicans, and not to get into politics, but that's been the standard of our political debate for a generation, and it's gotten us nowhere.
Do you think the ugliness and I say it's like a game of shirts and skins, what's been going on here, particularly in the last couple of years, I'm curious your take on it. Some have said, in the end, we'll look back, this will be healthy, you got to burn that out. Others say, no, this is just peeling a scab back, because that's not only been there, but it's going to stay there. How do you look at the climate we're in, and do we come out on the other side how?
Well, people ask me all the time, they say, oh man, how do we get civility back into politics? We're just so divided. You know, how do we go back to how things used to be? And I laugh because I say that's so ahistorical. So you do remember that the first Treasury Secretary was shot to death by the Vice President. You do remember that President Lincoln gave this very poetic, speech. This inaugural speech, it sounded great, but he said in essence, I'm going to kill as many people as it takes to win, because we can't have it both ways. I think, and I've said, we're in the early days of a beautiful and dangerous revolution in this country, and I'm not concerned that we're divided. We've always been divided. What I'm concerned about is that the right side wins, and I think the right side ought to be the side that is not against women, that is not against gay people and queer people, that's not against immigrants, that's not against the poor. I don't think we ought to give 1/4 to people who are trying to send us back into some retrograde, almost proto-fascist milquetoast America. We're not going back there. And I think this is, again, why these sort of nasty debates actually have very deep choices that we have to make, and hopefully we can make the right ones.
Well, the book, There Will Be No Miracles Here. First of all, amazing life story, but more than that, there's going to be a lot of stuff to make you think. You may not even agree with it all here, but it'll push you to think. And as they say, get outside your box. Casey, I appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate it.
And we'll be right back.